Hello, I'm Emily and I'm an educator at MOHAI, and this is Collection Connections Objects in Question, where we take a quick peek into Seattle history by taking a really close look at one item in our teaching collection to see what it can tell us about the past. Today, we're going to be exploring Coast Salish wool weaving, and this is our artifact. But first, let's have a think. So, what do I think about when I think about Coast Salish wool weaving? Let's take that question one word at a time. So Coast Salish refers to Native communities whose ancestral lands are here in Washington State, around the Puget Sound, and also a little bit further north towards the Salish Sea, and a little bit further south towards the Columbia River. And there are many different nations and tribes that are considered Coast Salish, and the Duwamish are the people whose ancestral lands and contemporary lands that the museum sits on. Now, with this in mind, what do I think about? And for me, I think about those lands and what they look like and what they feel like. And I think about the importance of these lands to Native communities and the relationship between humans and the land and non-human animals. Now, thinking about that word wool, where does wool come from? Wool is animal fur. And so I think about some of the different kinds of wool and where they come from. So one of the first animals that I think about are sheep, and that's where wool like merino comes from. And I also think about goats, which is where wool like cashmere comes from. And I also think about other animals like alpacas. But if I'm thinking locally where wool might come from, thinking about these lands, we have a lot of mountains, right? And goats love mountains. So mountain goat wool is historically and traditionally what Coast Salish wool weavers use as their wool source. But also there used to be a small white woolly dog that was also specifically bred by Coast Salish people for its wool. Now, let's think about that word weaving. So weaving is a way of making fabric in which horizontal threads are crossed over and under a set of vertical threads. Now, when I think of hand-woven wool items, I think of things like hats, and I think of coverings like sweaters and shawls, and I also think about blankets, which are also a really important part of life event ceremonies for Coast Salish people. Which means that wool weaving is a really important part of Coast Salish traditions. And traditions are ways of doing things or being or knowing that are passed down from one generation to the next over time. And traditions are also something that can change over time as well. And so I also might ask myself, what are different reasons that Coast Salish traditions like wool weaving have changed over time? And I might think about the ways that the invasion of these lands by European explorers and American settlers, or the forced displacement of Native communities from their ancestral homelands might have interrupted different Native traditions, or how things like weaving technologies have impacted Coast Salish wool weaving practices. This is the object we'll be exploring today. Our first step is to just take a close look at our artifact. Now, our next step is to use our senses to make as many observations as possible. So the very first thing that I notice is the materials. So this sounds like wood. It kind of feels like hard wood as well. And on this side, I can definitely see the grain of the wood too. And it's got that nice light tan color. Now, the next thing that I notice is the size. It's something that I can easily hold with one hand. It's really light. And as far as the diameter or the distance across the middle of the circle, it's about the width of my hand if I spread my fingers apart a little bit. And then I just mentioned the shape too, right? So this to me is a circle. We could also think about this as a disc, which is kind of a flat circle as well. If we turn it on its side, we can see that it's kind of flat, but also has a domed top. This bottom side is a lot flatter than the top part. And then the next thing that I notice is also all of these beautiful markings and design that we see on the object. So we've got some things like circles and swirls and things that look like leaves. And we also see some trigons, which are a shape that appears a lot in Coast Salish art. And we've also got some crescents too. Now, if I look further out than just the individual shapes and kind of look at maybe a set of shapes, like over here, to me that almost looks like a bird. Maybe the body and beak of a bird and then the wings over here. And then whenever I'm touching these designs, you can also kind of feel that wherever the wood is darker is a little bit further in from the surface of this object, which to me is maybe a clue that it's also been carved. Wow, look at that. This is a really interesting and different clue than we usually get. So what do I see here? I see what looks like raw wool. It's really soft. I see a wooden item or a set of items that looks pretty similar to our artifact as well, at least this object right here. And then we've got what looks like a ball of yarn, and we also have what looks like a blanket of some kind. Now, what do I think this is? I think that this is showing us the different steps in the wool weaving process. So we've got kind of the raw material over here, and we've got the finished product over here. And so these two items are kind of steps that happen in between. And our item is sitting right here between the raw wool and this spun ball of yarn. So that tells me that our item is used for spinning wool into yarn. Now, this is called a spindle whorl. So this part is the spindle, the rod is the spindle, and then this disc is the whorl. And wool is spun or twisted into yarn. And the reason that we twist it is because it kind of makes it stronger. And that twisting creates energy that is, it's possible for it to come undone. So the way that you kind of store that twist energy is by wrapping it around something like a spindle. Now, this spindle whorl works kind of similarly to a drop spindle, but instead of the spindle whorl being held up like this, it is rolled along the thigh instead. Now, what does this particular spindle whorl tell us about the wool weaving process? One of the things that I notice about this particular spindle whorl is that it's got a lot of really beautiful designs on it, and it's something that somebody has put a lot of work and effort and attention to detail into making. And that to me is maybe a clue that this is something that's really special and important. This particular spindle whorl was made by contemporary artist Malin Foster, and it definitely makes me really curious to see other works of hers and also to learn a little bit more about the wool weaving process based on what we've seen. What questions are you curious about? To explore some of your history questions or the online collection, you can visit the MOHAI website. That's mohai.org, mohai.org, and you can also email us at education@mohai.org if you have any requests for future collection connections, objects, and question topics. Thanks for watching.